Right, this is our first concept. In our first unit, we're going to be focusing on how we classify different types of matter. All matter can be broken down into two groups, and they're basically going to be split by whether or not they can be separated by physical means. Those that cannot be separated by physical means, and an example of physical mean would be using something called distillation or filtration. Ones that cannot be separated by those methods is called a substance, sometimes called a pure substance. The entire sample has the exact same composition throughout, and we also can write chemical formulas for substances, and we're going to show how those break down into two smaller groups in just a second. We also can have matter that can be separated by physical means, and this is referred to as a mixture. These are two or more different substances that have been mixed together, and in a mixture, they're combined in variable proportions and ratios. We can change how much of each part are present in a mixture, and it's still the same type of mixture. So let's look at substances first. Substances can either be separated by chemical means or cannot be separated by chemical means. Those that cannot be separated are called elements. Elements or samples of elements are made of atoms of a single type, so all the atoms are going to match each other. We can either have a monoatomic element, which means only one atom is present. It's not chemically combined with other atoms of sodium. Or we can have a diatomic element where we have, in this case, two bromine atoms that are attached to each other within the sample. Those that can be separated by chemical means are referred to as compounds. These are two or more different elements that are chemically combined in a fixed proportion. So let me talk about two pieces of this. First off, we can see that we have at least two different elements in table salt or sodium chloride. We also have at least two different elements in H2O. So that is one thing that first classifies this, as a compound. Also, one thing to know is that these are combined in fixed proportions. If I change how many hydrogens to oxygens I have, I no longer have water. So it's a very specific combination of elements. One thing that we're going to go into detail in just a second is something called a particle diagram. We need to be able to identify these and draw them. So an element, you'll see they all match in terms of the types of atoms. They're all one type. Compounds, we only have one type of particle, and by particle I mean this structure here. They all, these two different structures match, which tells us we have a substance, and it's a compound because we have two different elements. Mixtures, which is on the right hand of your worksheet, can be broken down to be either a homogeneous mixture or a heterogeneous mixture. One thing I want you to add next to a homogeneous mixture is that these are very commonly referred to as solutions. And later in the year, towards the end of the second quarter, beginning of the third quarter, we'll be talking about solutions specifically. These have a uniform composition. They look the same throughout the entire sample. We can't distinguish the different parts of the mixture from each other. So great examples is salt water when all the salt has been dissolved, iced tea, a lot of different bottled beverages. Specifically ones that are transparent, allow light to go through, are great examples of homogeneous mixtures. Heterogeneous mixtures, these are not uniform throughout. I can visibly see the different materials within it. So think of Italian salad dressing or concrete. One we'll see in the lab is, if we have sand that's in water, I can see the sand, I can see the water. So if you can see the different parts of the mixture, it's going to be considered heterogeneous. We also can show particle diagrams for these mixtures, and we'll talk about kind of how to distinguish them within those diagrams. Alright, so these particle diagrams that I've mentioned that you've drawn, these show how the forms of matter look in a simple diagram form. Each different type of circle represents a different type of particle or atom. So we're first going to start off with an element. You can see here that we have a monoatomic element on the left. Okay, we have single atoms in the sample, and then on the right we have a diatomic element such as, say, Cl2, or in the earlier slide we saw Br2, bromine. So one thing I want to point out is that this is a substance because if I circle one type of particle, everything matches it. It's the same throughout. Same thing over here, if I circle one type of particle, they all match it. The only difference here is that, again, we have a monoatomic element versus a diatomic element. Here we have a compound. First off, we can tell that this is a substance because here's one compound and they all match. It's all one type, so that classifies this as a substance. And then on the right hand side, same thing. Here's my one type of compound. They all match. So another thing I want to point out is, remember, compounds, you have to have at least 2 or more chemically combined elements to make it a compound. So for example, we have 2 examples of lead oxide. We'll differentiate those later in the year, and they're both considered compounds. All right, homogeneous mixtures or solutions. Remember, these are 2, in this case on the left-hand side, evenly dispersed elements. On the right, we have an element and a compound that are evenly dispersed. So in if we were looking at the sample, we couldn't tell the difference between the different elements on the left. We couldn't see a visible difference. It's going to look the same throughout. Okay, one thing I like to point out here is that, again, if I go through, I can tell this is a mixture because we have at least 2 different types of elements there. Same thing on the right, I have at least 2 different types of particles. Here, an element and a compound, so it has to be a mixture. And it's a homogeneous mixture because they're evenly distributed. A heterogeneous mixture, first off, I can tell it's a mixture because I have on the left 2 different elements. On the right, I have an element and a compound. So again, this allows me to classify this as a mixture. Here, though, it's heterogeneous because they're clumped together. You can see here that the blue dots that are representing one type of element are clustered together, and then you have the purple in the middle. Here, this would be like a great example of, say, water and sand. Okay, here you can kind of see a divide. They're clustered together, so they're unevenly dispersed. That helps you tell that you have a heterogeneous mixture. All right, so now we're just going to do some practice problems. I specifically, for this topic, picked out some old Regents questions, just so you can start to kind of see how you should go about solving these. So first off, here we have our piece of matter. We're going to classify salt water. So here, first off, you have to differentiate, is it a compound or a mixture? Salt water, it has 2 different types of substances, salt and water. So that means I have to have a mixture. So that gets rid of A and B. Now that we have a mixture, we need to think about how the proportions of the compounds are going to compare. Are they going to be fixed or are they going to vary? Since this is a mixture, mixtures always have variable components. I can change how much salt is dissolved into the water, which means my answer is going to be the letter D. Okay, only fixed proportions can be compounds. All right, number 2, which substance cannot be decomposed by a chemical change? If I was answering this question or helping a student, I would first want to think about what is not decomposed by chemical change, and that is our elements. Okay, elements only have one chemical symbol. Okay, so let's look through. Here we have aluminum and chlorine. Okay, that's a compound. Here I have hydrogen, oxygen. That is a compound. Here I have hydrogen and iodine. That is a compound. Here I only have copper. So since this only is one element, that cannot be decomposed by chemical change. So my answer is last one, D, for copper. Number 3, which list of formulas represents compounds only? Remember, compounds, we want to see at least 2 elements. And I really should put in there different. Okay, so if we look through A, this is looking pretty good. We have C and a capital O. We have H and a capital O, capital N and H. So this one is looking pretty good, but we should go through and continue on just to double check. If you look at option C, this only has, while it's H2, there are 2 hydrogens. So this is an element. Neon is also just an element. So that gets rid of C. B, we have 3 different diatomic elements, which are not compounds. So that gets rid of B. And then D, we have, yes, a compound, Mg and O, Na and Cl. However, O2 is an element, which gets rid of D. So as you can see, compounds have to have at least 2 different elements. So you're looking for at least 2 capital letters. And that leaves us with A. Oops, so let's circle that and place it. All right, which particle diagrams represents a mixture of elements X and Z only? So first thing, we're looking for a mixture. So let's start here. A, I have one type of particle. It looks the same throughout, so that has to be a substance because they all match. B, this is a possibility. Okay, we have one type of particle there, one type of particle here, so that is a mixture. C, we have a couple different things. We have one element, a different element, and a compound. So we also have a mixture there. And D, again, we have two different types of elements, so this is also a mixture. So let's go back. It says a mixture of element X and element Z. So we have two elements that are mixed together, which means it cannot be B because these are compounds. It cannot be C because we also have a compound present. However, D is correct because we have element X and element Z. Okay, so we have answer D. And finally, number 5, which particle diagram represents a sample of one compound only? So a couple of things. We want to be differentiating compounds from elements, and also that it's a single compound. So we're looking for a pure substance. Here, A, while we only have one type of particle, so this is a substance, here this is a diatomic element. Okay, both dots are the same element, which means it's an element, not a compound. For B, so we can get rid of A, B, we have one type of diatomic element mixed with a different type. So right off the bat, we have a mixture, so it can't be a compound. So you can get rid of B. C, we have one type of compound, looking good so far. However, we also have a different type of compound in the same sample. So this is a mixture, which means it cannot be one compound. And then finally, when we check D, we can see here's a compound, okay, two different elements, and then they all match. So D is the correct answer. All right, you are all set.